Today is a very exciting day because today marks the start of the best reading season of the year. And I'm talking, of course, about autumn. Autumn is a book lover's dream, okay? Rain pattering against the window, clouds dark and charcoal gray overhead, cozy sweaters, and best of all, it is spooky season, which means you can cuddle up with cats. Horror books. Right, Kenzo? Oh! I cannot wait to dive into the books that I'm going to be reading this fall, which is what I'm here to talk about today. I hope that you will join me on this wonderfully cozy, spooky fall reading vlog. First up, we have a book that if you saw my National Book Tokens shopping spree video, then you know that one of the books I'm super excited to read this fall is Monstrilio by Gerardo Sámano Córdova. It sounds like it's about this woman whose young son dies, and in her grieving process, this mother cuts off a piece of his lung and she nurtures it until it gains sentience. And I think it turns into this little monster thing. Then we have a book that the book Leo mentioned several times on her channel. That book is Slewfoot. I don't think it could get more autumnal than this, and that excites me. As you can imagine based on the cover, this is about a witch, from what I can gather. But I don't know much else about it except that it has very beautiful art. There's a cool picture on one of the chapters. What? I don't want to spoil anything, but I'm super excited. It just looks so perfect for fall. I'm really excited to read like a witchy book. So that's that one. Then we have a book that's been on my radar for several years, and it is House of Leaves by Danielewski or something. Every time I look up best horror books, this is on the list. I actually saw this book at the bookstore and it was like a textbook. It was so big, so heavy, the pages were super glossy. I think that's because it pieces together like journal entries and newspaper clippings and things like that. I'm not totally clear, and for that reason I don't know how well it's going to fare as a digital book, but I just knew that if I were to get that giant textbook, I would want to know beforehand that I liked the book. I think it has something to do with like a family and secrets in the house, so yeah. The next book that I want to read is one that I'm going to listen to on audiobook. It's about 14 hours long, and that is Rebecca by Daphne Du Maurier, as the narrator pronounces it. I feel like it's marketed as a horror book, but I feel like it's going to be the kind of horror that's like mainly drama with maybe a metaphorical ghost or something like that. But I think this story of the young woman being swept up by the widow Maximilian de Winter and being taken to his house that used to be like run by his wife, being haunted by the memory of his wife, sounds very autumnal. I think it's going to be a perfect audiobook to listen to as I read the rest of these books. I do think I'll end up having time for another audiobook, so I'm leaving that open. And then, because I wanted also a cozy, not scary autumnal book to read, and because this has been recommended by so many booktubers, I decided to read Legends and Lattes. I don't know if I'm gonna like it because I have found that with these books, even when people I love are rating them super high, I find that sometimes they're just too distant from the type of stuff I usually like to read. This one, from what I understand, is about an orc or a troll or something who opens a cafe. Now that I say it, that premise sounds so freaking cute and so cozy. Like, are all these mythical creatures gonna be going there and having coffee and chatting? Because that sounds really cute. We have some exciting books to get through, and I for one cannot wait. First up, we have Monstrilio. Let's get reading. interesting opening, very intriguing. Basically, this mother cuts off a piece of her dead son's lung and sticks it in a jam jar. Okay. I'm super excited to keep reading. We have a lot to catch up on. I have been extremely busy. Somehow during that time I've still managed to find time to read. I just didn't have time to talk to you and tell you my thoughts about the books that I read. So today I just want to chat to you about some of the books that I finished, a few books that have been added to my fall reading list, and one DNF. Grab yourself a cup of coffee or tea and let's talk about books. So, I finished Monstrilio a couple weeks ago at this point. This is such a unique story about this grieving mother who cuts out a piece of her son's lung and feeds it and nourishes it so that it grows into this little monster. But it goes beyond that and follows this little monster as it basically grows up and has to navigate the world. To be honest, I haven't given it much thought since I finished it, which is not a great sign. I thought the characters were interesting, but thinking back, I feel like I don't know the characters that well, and you don't get much insight to the characters outside of this story. In terms of the writing, you also don't get much beyond like surface level descriptions. This had very nice writing, but at times it was a little too choppy for me, and there were times where the descriptions felt like they could go a step further. I feel like I couldn't vividly see the places they were in all that much. I just wanted a bit more depth. I would still recommend it for the unique story and the compelling character of Monstrilio. If you just want to read about a monster created from his mother's grief, you might like this book. I also finished Rebecca by Daphne Du Maurier, and I really enjoyed my experience of listening to that book. I agree with lists and reviews I've seen online that it's a great autumnal book, because it totally is. That one has also been percolating in my head a little bit and haven't had time to reflect on it, but I can already tell that I must have enjoyed it so much more than Monstrilio because I remember everything. I could tell you a lot about the characters. I have a very clear image in my head of the setting. It's about this young woman who is working as a travel companion for this old lady when she meets this dashing widow in a hotel. They spend a few like secretive afternoons together, going on long drives, and to be honest, he is kind of a dull dud, and I don't know what she sees in him except the opportunity for a different life, or maybe just comfort and stability. But yeah, after a few days of him driving her around and telling her how she should feel and making her feel bad about herself, he proposes and she is swept off her feet. This is the story of a woman living in the shadow of her husband's dead wife. She's in this big house that Rebecca used to run effortlessly, and the servants all say, oh, but Mrs. De Winter used to do it like this, or oh, Mrs. De Winter never did this. And the narrator, who's nameless throughout the book except as the new Mrs. De Winter, feels totally out of place because she has come from a way less extravagant background. She's never run a house before. She doesn't really know what to do. And she constantly feels like she can't live up to this amazing image of Rebecca, not only in the eyes of all the servants in the house and everyone in the neighborhood, but also in the eyes of her new husband. She feels like Maxim is constantly comparing her to Rebecca, and she suffers so much as a result. And I just loved being inside her head. She really lives so much of her life inside her own head. Like, there would be long stretches where she was just talking about potential scenarios. I liked how long the audiobook was, getting so familiar with the characters, spending a long time with this new Mrs. De Winter. The setting as well is just so perfect for this time of year. It's like this huge mansion by the sea. Felt like I could literally see the like gray English sky and the dark charcoal waves crashing against the cliffs and the like cold beach and the windswept grass and rocky paths and this like oppressive presence of the ghost of Rebecca everywhere. I'm so glad that I read it. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, it was a great audiobook. There wasn't anything like special about it really, but it was well read. Clearly, I feel like I've like lit up talking about Rebecca. So that tells me even more that I just didn't really like Monstrilio as much as I was expecting to. I think maybe just it had been hyped up a bit too much. But Rebecca is a classic for a reason. Now let's talk about the DNF. I'm sorry to say that there even was a DNF, but let me tell you, trying to read House of Leaves digitally, big mistake. And then I went to my university library and I checked out a physical copy. If you'll remember, I said that this book was like a textbook. Am I wrong? I can show you why it would not work as a digital book. First of all, there are several different perspectives, and there will be like one perspective going on, and then the other perspective will come in as a footnote, like long footnotes, and they're written in different fonts. But that couldn't be reflected in the ebook, so it was just very confusing, and that looks reasonable enough. But then you flip through and you see that the formatting is all over the place. There's illustrations, crazy text, pictures, and so on. Don't ever try to read this book as an ebook, okay? That's point number one. Point number two is I really struggled to get into this book. I've only gotten this far, and sadly, I need to give up. And the reason for that is there's like two stories going on in the beginning. One of them I think is quite interesting, is the perspective of this guy who is telling the story of something really scary that happened. And it starts with him finding out that this old man died, and his friend and he break into this dead guy's house. And the house has all this weird crap in it. And that's really intriguing. But then there's this other storyline that is just like a analysis of a movie that doesn't exist. And I'm not even super clear on what this film is. I think that this analysis was something that they found in the old man's house, like the old man wrote it, but it is like pages upon pages that just read like a critique or an analysis or like even like a textbook about this movie. And I just found it pretty dull. I know I'm gonna give this book another chance, but I just couldn't. If anyone's read this, I would love to be convinced to stick with it. Like, when does it get exciting? Why am I reading an analysis of this movie that doesn't even exist? Please tell me. But for now, I'm going to, having renewed this book several times already, I'm going to go ahead and return it, and I will revisit it at a later date when I have less on my plate. And that was a rhyme. Now for the new additions to my autumnal reading list. I believe I mentioned that I wanted to keep few slots open for potential audiobooks for when I finished Rebecca, and I honestly finished that a lot quicker than I was expecting. Luckily, I had an alternative right at my fingertips through my Libby library app, and that is Dracula. So I have been listening to that, and I am nearly halfway through, and I really like it. To be honest, it's even scarier than I was expecting. Not that I'm like actually scared. There's a lot of creepy images in it. Dracula is really creepy. I was just remembering one of the images. But what really intrigues me is that I'm about halfway through the audiobook, and everything that happened in the movies has already happened pretty much. So I'm like, what is the rest of this gonna cover? And why weren't they covered in the movies? Unless it's just gonna happen very slowly. But yeah, really enjoying it so far. It's also a long one, like 18 hours, which I don't think I've ever listened to an audiobook that long, except obviously all the Harry Potter books. But those were in a pack of CDs. Anyway, my only thing with Dracula so far is I feel like there are some perspectives that I'm not totally clear why they are included, or at least in the beginning I wasn't super clear, because you start with the perspective of Jonathan Harker, who goes to Count Dracula's house to like be his real estate agent to try to sell him a house in England. And then the perspective is him writing journal entries. Then it switches to the perspective of like his fiance and all the people back home. And there's this quite long exchange between his fiance and her friend. And just, I guess at the start of that, I was like, why are we spending so much time with these two? They're not even talking about anything interesting. But then it did go into more spooky stuff. But yeah, really enjoying it so far. Again, perfect book to read during the autumn. I'm starting to realize that any book set in the UK is likely to be a good autumnal read, because it is always cloudy and rainy here, and that is what we want. And then the last addition to my autumnal reading list is one that I actually included on my list of autumn book recommendations last year. If you haven't seen that video, you should check it out. There's a lot of good autumnal reading in there that you can dive into in the coming weeks. But that book is The Dutch House by Ann Patchett. And the reason that I'm reading this again is because it was one of my sister's picks for our book club, and I previously listened to it on audiobook, which was read by Tom Hanks, and I wanted a chance to get myself a copy because I really enjoyed it, and also just to read it again in a book club setting. And I'm really happy I did, because I have been loving it so far. I love reading books that I've listened to because it's like you get to experience it all over again. Really enjoying reading this with my sisters, especially because it's a story all about siblings and the unbreakable bonds that you have with your siblings from childhood. Things you go through, you face together. You're a united front with your parents, and everything that life throws at you, you can seek comfort from your siblings. Anyway, I'm really excited to keep reading this, and I'll come back and share my thoughts once I've finished it. Also, I just want to plug my absolute favorite secondhand online book retailer, World of Books. That's where I got this book. It was listed as very good, and it is absolutely perfect. There is not a flaw on this book, and I think it cost me about £4. So if you want to get your hands on some books but you don't want to pay the whites out of your eyes, check out World of Books. It is my favorite place ever. I finished The Dutch House, and it was fantastic. Fantastic. I can highly recommend listening to the audiobook read with the cozy, warm, heartwarming voice of Tom Hanks, and then once you've had a little break, followed up by reading the physical book. It was just an amazing experience reading it for the second time, and at times I would hear things in Tom Hanks' voice. I just feel like this is such a special book. At its simplest, this is a story about two siblings who lean on each other throughout their entire lives, and they always have each other. Sibling stories are not that common, like such heartwarming ones. Okay, now that I think about it, there are quite a few, but I feel like so often it's like siblings who hate each other and then like have one moment of reconciliation at the end. You know what I mean? But this book, it feels so effortless the way it's written, because it jumps between different timelines and it'll throw in anecdotes here and there, and it will recall conversations that happened at a different time. And in doing so, it just unfolds this gorgeous, cozy, heartwarming, emotional, and lovely story. And I think I gave it like 4.5 stars after listening to it, but this time it was a 5-star read. Even though I love this book so much, I can understand people not liking it. It's not like sensational in any way. It's not like in your face. It's very understated. It's very much like a man looking back on his life and just remembering the moments that stood out to him. Ann Patchett is able to capture Danny's voice so well. I just felt like I got to know all the characters so well. What else can I say about this book? Maybe I'll just leave it there. If you want to hear more about it, you can always check out my autumnal recommendations video, in which this features. Otherwise, I have several more books to get through this autumn season, and if you can believe it, I have another book to add, and it's a monster. The reason for that is that I'm doing a read-along with this organization called Tandem Collective, as well as other book lovers in my publishing master's cohort, and we're going to be reading this book together and checking in on Instagram with our thoughts about various things along the way. So it's like 600 pages, and I'm reading it over the next 2 weeks. Wish me luck. So I just started this book today, and I'm really enjoying it so far. And I'm happy to report that it is giving very much autumnal vibes, because if it wasn't, I probably wouldn't be enjoying it. But it kind of reminds me of Piranesi. It's like very mysterious. You don't really know what's going on. There's all kinds of crazy like magical realism stuff happening, and I really like the writing style so far, so that's really good because I'm excited to continue with it. So as usual, I'm just gonna keep reading, enjoying the spooky season. We're just about to enter November, which is my favorite month, so I'll check in again at some point. Ow. Once again, we have a lot to catch up on. Since we last spoke, I finished 3 books and started a 4th. So this is going to be the last check-in of the autumnal reading vlog. It's a beautiful rainy day, and I hope you'll stick around while I reflect on the last few books that I read this season. There were some gems, there were some okay books, but mostly they were all really good. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first book that I finished was Slewfoot. This is the very dark story of a woman basically having to deal with the patriarchy in the 1600s. At the same time though, there's this mysterious being that's being nurtured back to life by these strange woodland creatures, and this beast and this woman form a relationship, and I'm not gonna spoil anything, but it gets pretty witchy. It definitely fit the brief for a spooky autumnal read. The illustrations alone made it worth reading, but it didn't become my new favorite book. It is quite upsetting though when you think of all the women in history who have been brutally murdered just because men felt threatened by them. And there's definitely some scenes in this that are quite upsetting. On the whole though, I think it portrays an empowered woman who's not going to take any shit and who is going to stand up for herself. And if she needs to make a deal with a demon, that's what she's gonna do, and more power to her. I do also think this is the most fitting fall book that I read, so it gets that award. Then I did manage to finish the Book of Love, the Brick of Love, in 2 weeks as part of that read-along. And I think during this time, I read more books than I've ever read at any given time, because not only was I reading all my autumnal books, but I added this for the read-along, and I was doing an internship as an author's assistant, so I also read her book, which I didn't even include in this blog, Reading Machine over here. And I read this book, and I loved it. I loved it. It was so good. This book is so fascinating because it's like a normal small town teenager story, but it's mixed with all this ancient magic and fantasy. I thought it was so well written. I love the characters. Let me tell you a bit about the plot. It opens with this girl who's mourning the death of her sister. Well, mourning is a bit of an exaggeration because there's clearly some bad blood between them. But then in the next chapter, it cuts to the sister's perspective, and she and these other 2 kids from their school are in this other world, some astral plane between life and death. So immediately you're thrown into this mysterious, confusing, magical story, and it just unfolds from there. The writing was so strong, the dialogue excellent, the characters compelling, the relationships between them fantastic, the ancient magic confusing, but I don't think that's a reflection of Kelly Link. I was just so enthralled by the world that this author created. There's so much stuff you don't understand in the beginning, and the mystery unfolds throughout the book. So I want to go back knowing what I know now and read it again. I think I docked a 1/4 star because by the end I feel like I still had some questions, and I feel like Kelly Link tried to explain everything. Maybe it just went over my head. I can highly recommend it to people who like strong writing, 3-dimensional characters, LGBTQIA+ representation, magic, a world that's totally malleable by these ancient magical forces, blended with this small town, wintry story of some teenagers just trying to figure out their life. A bit of romance, and a big door-stopping book. Oh, I gotta put this down. The 3rd book I finished, I honestly didn't think I was going to in time for this video, because it took me a month and a half to listen to Dracula, all 18 hours of it. I think for me, it did feel like it could have been half as long. And I don't know if my perspective is skewed because I'd already seen the movies, which I'm 99.9% sure only cover the first half, or they just cut out a whole storyline that's in the second half of the book. So maybe that's why during that second half I was like, this is dragging on a little bit. It definitely is creepy. I think the epistolary style is effective. I'm glad I finally read it. It holds up pretty well, I would say, aside from the many descriptions of this mentally ill person as being a lunatic. That was also the case in Rebecca, so you just gotta take these old books with a pinch of salt. I definitely think it's a good book to read during autumn, and all in all, I enjoyed my experience of listening to the audiobook, but I'm also glad that it's finally over. Now I'm just really excited to watch the new Nosferatu movie that's coming out. So those are the books that I finished since we last talked, and I just have one book left as part of my autumnal reading list, and that is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I'm reading this in a book club with my sisters, and we're all really enjoying it. It is possibly the coziest little book that I have ever dived into. It's about this orc called Viv who gives up her fighting days to open up a cafe in this town that has never heard of coffee. The stakes are so low. Every chapter just describes the developments of this cafe, like hiring these cute little characters to help her set up the cafe, starting to get some customers, realizing they need to have some delicious pastries, hiring this cute little character to make the pastries, and all the descriptions are just so cozy and perfect to read during this autumn season. It's just so cute. Many of the characters seem to want to shed the stereotypes of their species and try something new, like Viv the orc, Tandri the succubus. In terms of the writing style, it's not like anything spectacular, and I have been slightly bothered by the amount of adverbs, which is a very, like, literary snob thing of me to say, but that's just what you learn in creative writing classes, that adverbs are not to be included because they are a mark of lazy writing. But at the same time, this sort of simple approach to the writing is what makes it such a nice, easy read, and it's also giving like YA, which is also very cozy, I think. Really enjoying it, and I just can't get enough of the cozy descriptions of things happening in this cafe. And I couldn't ask for a better way to end this wonderful season of autumnal reading. I read so many good books this autumn. There weren't any that I didn't enjoy. They were all great because autumn books are simply the best. If you've seen my last autumn recommendations video, you'll see that there are like 3 of my all-time favorite books included on that list, because books that you read during the fall that have spooky, cozy vibes just hit different. They're just the best, okay? And I think that has been proven once again through this vlog. Thank you so much for sticking around this far. I had so much fun reading these wonderful books, and I hope you enjoyed hearing a bit about them. Let me know in the comments if you're gonna add any of these to your to-read list, or if you have any autumnal book recommendations for me to think about reading next season. Or better yet, if you have any winter book recommendations. I mean, I have already some that I'm eyeing, but I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you so much, as always, for being here, and I'll catch up with you again soon. Bye!